There's someone living inside you. You've felt them. In the reactions you can't explain, the anger that doesn't match the situation, the attraction you can't justify, the disgust that feels too strong. Most people spend their entire lives pretending this person doesn't exist. You've built a story about who you are. Good person, kind, rational, in control, and most of the time, that story holds. But then something slips. A thought you'd never say out loud. A fantasy that makes you uncomfortable. A moment of cruelty that surprises even you. And you do what everyone does. You explain it away. I was tired. I wasn't myself. That's not who I really am. But here's the thing. It is who you are. Just not the version you've agreed to show. There's a term for this. The shadow. Not as a metaphor for evil, but as a psychological reality. Everything you've decided you're not is still there. Watching, waiting, growing in the dark. Think about the people who irritate you most. The ones who make your skin crawl for reasons you can't quite name. What if I told you they're mirrors? Not reflections of who you are, but reflections of what you've rejected in yourself. The arrogance you see in them, you've buried in you. The weakness you despise in them, you've hidden from yourself. The carelessness, the selfishness, the hunger. You don't hate them because they're different. You hate them because somewhere deep down, you recognize them. This is what most self-help won't tell you. You can't become whole by only accepting the good parts. You can't integrate by pretending half of you doesn't exist. The shadow doesn't go away when you ignore it. It just learns to move without your permission. You've seen this. The person who prides themselves on being calm until one day they explode. The one who's always selfless until resentment poisons everything they give. The one who never lies until they build an entire life on a hidden truth. The shadow doesn't announce itself. It leaks in the slip of the tongue. The joke that cuts too deep. The dream you wake from, disturbed. Here's what makes this so uncomfortable. Meeting your shadow means meeting the version of yourself you've spent years trying to kill. It means admitting that the person you've been condemning in others lives in you too, not as a flaw, as a fact. There's a reason we resist this. Because if you acknowledge the shadow, you have to give up the story. The one where you're only light, only good, only the hero. And that story, it's protected you. It's kept you safe. It's made you acceptable, but it's also made you partial. A fragment pretending to be whole. Let me tell you what happens when you deny the shadow long enough. It doesn't disappear. It doesn't fade. It intensifies. Because every time you say that's not me, you're feeding it. Every time you push it down, you're making it stronger. And eventually, it stops asking for permission. You see this in the person who spent their whole life being the responsible one. The one everyone depends on. The rock. The adult in every room. They've rejected spontaneity, rejected recklessness, rejected the part of them that just wants to burn it all down and start over. And for years it works. They hold it together. They're dependable, predictable, safe. Until one day, they're not. One day they make a decision that shocks everyone. They leave the marriage. They quit the job. They disappear without explanation. And everyone says, I never saw it coming. But it was always coming. Because the shadow doesn't wait forever. Or think about the person who's built their identity around being good, moral, ethical, beyond reproach. They've spent years condemning those who lie, cheat, manipulate. They've drawn a clear line between themselves and those people. And then one day, they find themselves lying. Not a small lie, a big one. The kind that requires more lies to cover it up. And they're horrified. Because they genuinely don't recognize themselves. But here's the truth. They've always had that capacity. They've always carried that potential. They just refused to admit it was there. So when it finally emerged, it emerged wildly, without consciousness, without control. This is the danger of the shadow. Not that it exists, but that it operates in the dark. You might be thinking, but I know my flaws. I'm aware of my weaknesses. And maybe you are. But knowing your flaws isn't the same as knowing your shadow. Your flaws are the things you've admitted, the things you can talk about, the acceptable imperfections. I'm impatient. I'm a perfectionist. I care too much. Those aren't shadow material. Those are negotiated confessions, flaws you can own without losing your self-image. The shadow is deeper. It's the thing you'd never admit. The thing that, if you saw it in yourself, would make you question everything. For some people, the shadow is rage. Pure, unfiltered, destructive rage. They've spent their whole life being measured, calm, reasonable. They pride themselves on never losing control. But underneath there's a furnace, and they can feel it sometimes. In the grip of their jaw, in the tightness of their chest, in the fantasies they'd never speak aloud. They're terrified of it, because if they let it out, even for a moment, they're afraid it would consume everything. So they keep it locked down. And they judge anyone who can't. Anyone who yells, who breaks things, who loses their temper. Those people become the enemy. Not because they're bad, but because they're proof. Proof that the rage exists. Proof that it's possible to let it out. Proof that the person you've been containing could escape. For others, the shadow is neediness. Desperate, aching, uncontrollable need. They've built an identity around independence. I don't need anyone. I'm fine on my own. I'm not like those people who fall apart without validation. But deep down, there's a child. A child who wants to be held, who wants to be told they're enough, who would do almost anything to not be abandoned. And they hate that child. They've spent years burying it, mocking it in others, calling it weakness. But it's still there, and it runs the show in ways they don't see. In the people they choose, in the walls they build, in the way they leave before they can be left. The shadow always finds a way. That's the thing people don't understand. You think you're in control. You think you've dealt with it by ignoring it. But the shadow doesn't need your permission. It just needs your blind spots. Here's how you know the shadow is active. You overreact. Someone does something small, and your response is massive, disproportionate. And afterward, you don't fully understand why. You repeat patterns. The same type of relationship, the same type of conflict, the same outcome, over and over, despite your best intentions. You project. You see in others what you can't see in yourself. And you feel certain about it, absolutely convinced that they're the problem, that they're the ones who need to change. These aren't coincidences. They're symptoms. Symptoms of a part of you that's running the show from backstage. There's a strange comfort in the shadow though, because as long as it stays hidden, you get to keep your story. You get to stay the hero, the victim, the misunderstood one, the one who's better than them. But the cost is high, because you can't be whole without it. You can't be integrated. You can't actually know yourself. You're just managing an image. And images are exhausting to maintain. So what happens when you finally turn toward the shadow? When you stop running? When you actually look at the part of you you've been denying? It's terrifying at first, because you've spent so long believing that acknowledging it would destroy you. That if you admitted the anger, the selfishness, the weakness, the desire, you'd become that thing entirely. You'd lose yourself. But that's not what happens. What happens is recognition. You see that the shadow isn't a monster. It's just the parts of you that never got sunlight. The parts you were told were unacceptable. The parts that didn't fit the role you were supposed to play. And when you see them, really see them, they lose their power. Not because they disappear, but because they're no longer hidden. They're no longer operating without your awareness. This doesn't mean you act on every impulse. It doesn't mean you let the shadow take the wheel. Integration isn't indulgence. It's consciousness. It's saying, yes, this is also me. This capacity for cruelty, mine. This hunger for power, mine. This fear of being nothing, mine. And once you've claimed it, it doesn't control you anymore. Because it's not fighting for recognition. It's not leaking out in ways you can't predict. It's just there, part of the whole. The people who seem most alive, most real, most integrated, they're not the ones who've eliminated their darkness. They're the ones who've made peace with it. They know what they're capable of. They've looked at the ugliest parts of themselves and said, I see you. And because of that, they're not at war with themselves. They're not pretending. They're not projecting. They're just whole, complicated, human. But here's the part that no one talks about. Meeting the shadow doesn't happen once. It's not a single revelation. It's a practice, because the shadow shifts. As you grow, as your life changes, new parts of you get pushed into the dark. New qualities become unacceptable. New desires get denied. So the work is ongoing. The question is always, what am I refusing to see right now? What am I projecting onto someone else? What am I certain I'm not that I probably am? There's a reason this is so hard. Because the shadow threatens the ego. The ego, the conscious sense of who you are, needs to believe it's in control. It needs to believe it knows itself. It needs clear boundaries, clear definitions. I am this, I am not that. The shadow destroys that clarity. It says, you're also that. You're also the thing you hate. You're also the thing you fear. And the ego hates that. Because if you're everything, then who are you? But that's the paradox. You only become yourself by admitting you're not just yourself. You're also the stranger, the one you've been avoiding, the one you've been judging in everyone else. And when you finally meet them, when you stop calling them the enemy and start calling them yours, something shifts. You stop needing to prove you're good. You stop needing to be right all the time. You stop needing others to carry what you won't carry yourself. You just become real, flawed, whole. So here's the question you probably don't want to ask. What part of yourself are you most afraid to meet? What quality do you despise most in others? What do you insist over and over that you are not? Because that's where it lives. In the place you refuse to look. In the reaction you can't explain. In the person you swear you'll never become but already are. Just in ways you haven't admitted yet. The shadow isn't your enemy. It's the part of you that's been waiting. Waiting to be seen. Waiting to be brought into the light. Not to be celebrated, not to be acted upon, but to be known. And maybe that's the real work. Not becoming someone better, but becoming someone whole.